The blood drained from Thomas Grant's face as he stood frozen in the doorway of his ranch house office, the wanted poster crumpling slightly in his trembling hand, while the woman he had hired 3 months ago hummed softly in the kitchen, completely unaware that her carefully constructed new life was about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. He had come home early from checking the fence lines on his cattle ranch outside Bozeman, Montana, this scorching afternoon in July of 1882, seeking nothing more than a glass of cool water and perhaps a few quiet moments reviewing the ledgers. Instead, he had found Deputy Marshal Jim Hewitt lounging against his desk, rifling through a stack of wanted posters with the casual arrogance of a man who believed his badge granted him unlimited authority. The deputy had looked up with a grin that made Thomas's stomach turn, holding up one particular poster with obvious satisfaction. "Thought you might want to know what kind of criminal you have living under your roof, Grant," Hewitt had said, tossing the poster onto the desk. "That pretty little housekeeper of yours. She is worth $500 to whoever brings her in. Shot a man down in Santa Fe, or so they say. Beatrice Johnson is her name, though I would wager she did not tell you that when you hired her." Thomas had snatched up the poster, his eyes scanning the crude sketch that bore an undeniable resemblance to the quiet, gentle woman who had transformed his neglected home into something warm and welcoming over these past months. The charges listed made his blood run cold: murder, theft, fleeing justice. $500 for her capture, dead or alive. "I will be back tomorrow with the proper authorization to take her into custody," Hewitt had continued, adjusting his gun belt with theatrical precision. "Figured I would give you fair warning, seeing as how you are a respectable rancher and all. Would not want you caught up in harboring a fugitive. Course, if you were to help me apprehend her tonight, there might be a finder's fee in it for you." Thomas had said nothing, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached, watching as the deputy swaggered out of his office and mounted his horse. Only when the dust from Hewitt's departure had settled did Thomas allow himself to move, his legs carrying him slowly toward the kitchen where Beatrice was preparing supper, her dark auburn hair pinned up in a simple bun, her calico dress neat and modest as always. She looked up when he entered, her green eyes brightening with a smile that had become increasingly familiar and increasingly dangerous to his carefully guarded heart. "You are home earlier than expected, Mr. Grant. I have not finished with the evening meal yet, but I can fix you something if you are hungry. Beatrice." His voice came out rougher than he intended, and he saw the immediate shift in her expression, the smile fading as wariness crept into her features. She had always been cautious, he realized now. Always watching the horizon, always tensing when strangers rode up to the ranch. He had attributed it to the natural caution of a woman alone in wild country, but now he understood it was something far more specific. "What is wrong?" she asked quietly, setting down the wooden spoon she had been using to stir a pot of stew. He stepped fully into the kitchen and closed the door behind him, then held up the wanted poster. Her face went absolutely white, and for a moment he thought she might faint. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning pale. "I can explain," she whispered, but her voice held no hope, only resignation. "Did you kill someone?" The question came out blunt and harsh, but he needed to know, needed to understand what he was about to do. Beatrice closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Yes, but not the way they made it sound, not the way it says on that poster. Tell me." Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, gesturing for her to do the same. "Tell me everything, and tell me the truth. A deputy marshal was just here. He says he is coming back tomorrow to arrest you." She sank into the chair across from him, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap, a nervous gesture he had never seen from her before. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. His name was Richard Sutton. He was a wealthy merchant in Santa Fe, well-respected, well-connected. I worked in his household as a maid for nearly 2 years. He seemed kind at first, generous with his staff. But he had a son, Marcus, who thought that money and status meant he could do whatever he pleased. Thomas felt his gut tighten, already knowing where this story was headed. Marcus started following me around the house when his father was away on business, making comments, trying to corner me alone. I told the head housekeeper, but she said I was being dramatic, that a man like Marcus Sutton would never behave improperly. Then one night he came to the servants' quarters after everyone was asleep. He tried to force himself on me. Her voice broke slightly, but she pressed on, her gaze fixed on her hands. I fought him. There was a letter opener on my nightstand, something I used for opening correspondence for Mrs. Sutton. I grabbed it and I stabbed him. I did not mean to kill him, I only wanted him to stop, but the blade went into his chest and he collapsed. Self-defense, Thomas said immediately. Beatrice laughed bitterly. Do you think anyone would believe that? A poor Irish immigrant housemaid accusing the beloved son of one of the richest men in Santa Fe. I panicked. I knew they would hang me, so I ran. I took some money from Marcus's pocket to get away, which they called theft. And when Richard Sutton put out that warrant, he claimed I was trying to rob his son and killed him when he fought back. Who would believe me over him? Thomas stared at her across the table, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not just the efficient housekeeper who kept his home running smoothly, not just the woman whose laugh had started to brighten his lonely evenings, but a person who had fought for her life and lost everything because of it. I believe you, he said quietly. She looked up sharply, surprise written across her features. You do? I have known you for 3 months, Beatrice. You jump when a door slams. You flinch when anyone raises their voice. You are the gentlest person I have ever met. You nearly cried when you found that injured bird last month and nursed it back to health for 2 weeks. I do not believe for 1 second that you are a cold-blooded murderer. He stood abruptly, the wanted poster still clutched in his hand. And I will be damned if I let them hang you for defending yourself. Mr. Grant, you cannot interfere with the law, Beatrice said, rising as well, but there was hope flickering in her eyes now, fragile and tentative. You would be arrested too. You could lose everything. The law, Thomas said grimly, is not always the same as justice. He walked to the cast iron stove where the fire still burned for cooking and held the wanted poster over the flames. The paper caught instantly, curling and blackening, the crude sketch of Beatrice's face disappearing into ash. That deputy said he would return tomorrow with proper authorization. But tonight, there is no evidence that anyone matching your description is here. Thomas, she breathed, and it was the first time she had ever used his given name. The sound of it on her lips sent warmth through his chest, despite the gravity of their situation. He turned to face her fully, his mind racing through possibilities. We need to make it so you cannot be found. If Hewitt comes back and you are gone, he will search the territory. But if you are here and he has no reason to look twice. He trailed off, an idea forming. What are you thinking? Beatrice asked. Can you cut your hair? Change the way you look? She touched her long auburn hair instinctively. I suppose so. But Mr. Grant, if that deputy has already seen me, he said he would be back tomorrow, Thomas interrupted. Which means he did not see you today. He only had that poster. Without it, he just has a name and a description from a year ago. People change. You could be someone else entirely by the time he returns. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You want me to pretend to be someone different, not just someone different. Thomas took a deep breath, knowing he was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Beatrice Johnson is wanted for murder. But if Beatrice Johnson disappeared and someone else was here instead, someone who had every legal right to be on this property. He paused, the words heavy on his tongue. My wife, for instance. The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling of the forgotten stew on the stove. Beatrice stared at him, her lips parted in shock. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. And he was, Thomas realized. The idea had come to him in a flash of desperate inspiration, but now that he had spoken it aloud, it felt right in a way that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with the truth he had been avoiding for weeks. We could ride into town tonight, find the preacher. Be married before dawn. When Hewitt comes back tomorrow, you will be Mrs. Beatrice Grant, and you will have been living on this ranch as my wife. There is no law against a man marrying his housekeeper. It happens all the time out here. But the description, the name, Johnson, is a common surname. Half the Irish families in Montana have daughters named Beatrice. Without that poster, Hewitt has nothing but hearsay. And even if he suspects something, what can he prove? You would be a married woman with a husband willing to vouch for you, a respectable rancher's wife. Thomas moved closer, his voice dropping. It would only be on paper if that is what you want. I have 3 bedrooms in this house. You would be safe here, protected. I would never ask anything of you that you did not want to give. Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, and she wiped them away quickly. Why would you do this for me? Risk everything you have built? Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. Her fingers were work-roughened and warm, trembling slightly in his grasp. Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve a chance at a real life, not running and hiding forever. And because... He hesitated, then decided if he was already risking everything, he might as well risk his pride too. Because somewhere along the way these past 3 months, I stopped thinking of you as just my housekeeper. I look forward to coming home now. I listen for your voice in the house. I find excuses to spend time in whatever room you are working in. I have been alone for 7 years since my father died and left me this ranch, and I convinced myself I preferred it that way. But you changed that. Beatrice looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. I feel the same, she admitted in a whisper. I tried not to. I knew I had no right to care for anyone, not when I was living a lie. But you are a good man, Thomas Grant. You are kind and fair and honest, and being here has felt like the first real home I have had since I left Ireland as a child. Then let me help you, Thomas said. Let me keep you safe. She squeezed his hand, then nodded. Yes, yes, if you truly mean it, I will marry you. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by urgency. They had perhaps 12 hours before Hewitt returned, possibly with other lawmen. We need to leave now. Get whatever you need for the journey. We will ride to town, wake up Reverend Peters, and be married before the sun rises. Then we come back here and wait for Hewitt. Can you act surprised and indignant when he starts asking questions? A small smile touched Beatrice's lips, the first hint of her usual spirit returning. I can be quite convincing when I need to be, Mr. Grant. You should probably start calling me Thomas, he said with a slight smile of his own. We are about to be husband and wife after all. Within 20 minutes, they were mounted on 2 of Thomas's horses, riding through the darkening summer evening toward Bozeman. The town was small but growing, servicing the ranchers and miners who had been flooding into Montana territory over the past decade. Thomas had lived here most of his life, watching the town evolve from a rough collection of tents and temporary structures into something approaching civilization. He knew most of the residents by name, which would work in their favor now. They reached the white-painted church, just as the last light was fading from the western sky. Reverend Peters lived in a small house behind the church, and Thomas knocked firmly on his door, his other hand resting reassuringly on Beatrice's back. The Reverend answered in his nightshirt, a candle in hand, his gray hair standing up in tufts. "Thomas Grant, what on earth are you doing here at this hour? Forgive the intrusion, Reverend, but I need you to perform a marriage, tonight." Peters blinked owlishly at them. "Tonight." "But there are protocols, announcements to be made. This is the frontier, not Boston," Thomas interrupted gently but firmly. "And we are both of age, both willing, and both in need of your services. Please, Reverend, it is important." The older man looked between them, taking in Beatrice's neat but simple dress, Thomas's dusty work clothes, the urgency in both their faces. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. "Very well. Let me dress properly and fetch my Bible. You will need witnesses, however, 2 of them." Thomas had anticipated this. "The saloon will still be open. I can find 2 men willing to sign their names for $1 each." 10 minutes later, they stood in the small church with 2 somewhat inebriated but good-natured ranch hands who had been happy to earn easy money. Reverend Peters lit several lamps, casting warm light across the simple wooden pews and the plain cross mounted on the wall behind him. Thomas stood beside Beatrice, acutely aware of how quickly everything was moving, but also how right it felt. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Peters began, his voice taking on the formal cadence of the ceremony, "we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Thomas barely heard the words. He was too focused on Beatrice beside him, her hand small and warm in his, her profile lovely in the lamplight. When the Reverend asked if he took this woman to be his lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, Thomas answered clearly and firmly, "I do." Beatrice's voice trembled only slightly when she repeated the same vows, but her eyes were steady on his, full of trust and something else he did not dare name yet. "By the power vested in me by Montana Territory and the grace of God, I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Peters concluded. "You may kiss your bride, Thomas." Thomas hesitated, aware they had not discussed this part, but Beatrice solved the problem by rising on her toes and pressing a soft, brief kiss to his lips. It lasted barely a second, but he felt the impact of it down to his bones. They signed the marriage register, the 2 witnesses adding their marks, and then Thomas paid the Reverend and the ranch hands for their time. By the time they rode back out of town, it was nearing midnight, and Beatrice was legally Mrs. Thomas Grant. They rode in silence for a while, the stars brilliant overhead, the summer air still warm despite the hour. Finally, Beatrice spoke. "What happens now? Now we go home and you become my wife in truth," Thomas said, then quickly clarified as he felt her tense. "I mean in the eyes of anyone who might come asking questions. We need to make it look like we have been together for longer than just tonight. Tomorrow, we will move some of your things into the main bedroom, though you can sleep in one of the guest rooms for as long as you like. We need to be seen together in town, establish that we are married. The more normal everything appears, the less likely anyone will question it. And if Deputy Hewitt does not believe us, then we stand our ground. You are my wife now, Beatrice. That is a legal fact, recorded in the church register. Even if he suspects something, suspicion is not proof. Without that wanted poster, he would need new authorization from New Mexico Territory, which would take weeks to arrive. By then, you will have been established as Mrs. Grant, with dozens of witnesses who can attest to seeing us together." They reached the ranch house, and Thomas helped Beatrice down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. She looked up at him in the moonlight, and he saw uncertainty warring with hope in her expression. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know I keep saying it, but I do not have words for what you have done for me tonight." "You do not need to thank me," Thomas replied. He wanted to pull her closer, to kiss her properly the way he had been imagining for weeks, but he forced himself to step back. "You must be exhausted. Go on inside and get some rest. We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow." But neither of them moved. They stood there in the moonlit yard, the horses shifting and snorting softly behind them, the weight of what they had just done settling over them like a blanket. "Thomas," Beatrice began, then stopped. She took a breath and tried again. "When you said earlier that you had started to care for me, did you mean it? Or was that just to convince me to agree to this plan?" He could lie, could make this easier for both of them by pretending it was all strategy. But he had never been good at dishonesty, and he did not want to start now with her. "I meant every word. I have been fighting how I feel about you for at least a month now, telling myself it was inappropriate because you worked for me, because I barely knew you. But the truth is, I have fallen halfway in love with you, Beatrice, and I did not even realize it until I saw that wanted poster and thought about losing you." She drew in a sharp breath. "Halfway. I figured the other half would come with time, assuming you ever felt the same way." He tried to smile, though his heart was pounding. "I am not expecting anything from you, though. This marriage is for your protection first and foremost." Beatrice stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face with her fingertips, her touch feather light. "I think I might already be all the way in love with you," she whispered, "which terrifies me because I never thought I would be able to have this. Have someone who sees me, really sees me and does not turn away." Thomas caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I see you. And what I see is extraordinary." This time when they kissed, it was not the brief press of lips required by ceremony, but a real kiss, deep and searching and full of all the emotion they had both been holding back. Beatrice's arms came up around his neck, and Thomas wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close against him. She fit perfectly there, he thought distantly, like she had been made to stand exactly in this spot. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice rested her forehead against his chest. "I am still scared," she admitted. "So am I," Thomas said honestly, "but we will face it together. That is what marriage means, is it not?" She laughed softly, and the sound eased some of the tension coiled in his chest. They went inside together, and Thomas helped Beatrice bring a few of her belongings to the main bedroom to make it look lived in, though she insisted on actually sleeping in the guest room for now. He did not argue. They had all the time in the world to figure out the intimate details of their relationship. First, they needed to survive tomorrow. Deputy Marshal Hewitt arrived mid-morning, just as Thomas had expected. Thomas was working in the barn when he heard the sound of hooves, and he stepped out into the yard, wiping his hands on his work pants. Hewitt was not alone this time. He had brought 3 other men with him, all wearing badges. "Morning, Hewitt," Thomas called out, keeping his voice casual and slightly annoyed at the interruption. "To what do I owe the pleasure of another visit so soon?" "We are here for the woman," Hewitt said, dismounting. "Your housekeeper, Beatrice Johnson. Where is she?" Thomas frowned, making a show of confusion. "I do not have a housekeeper by that name. Are you feeling well, Deputy?" Hewitt's eyes narrowed. "Do not play games with me, Grant. I was here yesterday. I saw evidence of a woman living in this house. The same woman whose face is on a wanted poster from New Mexico." "Oh, you mean my wife?" Thomas let surprise color his voice. "You could have just said so. Beatrice is inside preparing lunch." The 4 lawmen exchanged glances. "Your wife?" Hewitt repeated slowly. "Yes, we were married last night at the church in town. Reverend Peters performed the ceremony. You are welcome to check with him if you do not believe me. Thomas crossed his arms. Now, would you mind telling me why you are asking about my wife in connection with a wanted criminal? Hewitt looked thrown, but he recovered quickly. Convenient timing, is it not? I mention a wanted woman named Beatrice Johnson, and suddenly you show up married to someone named Beatrice. Johnson is a common enough surname, Thomas said calmly. And I have been courting Beatrice for 2 months now. Ask anyone in town. They have seen us together at the general store at Sunday services. We decided it was time to make it official. This was a bluff, and Thomas held his breath hoping Hewitt would not immediately call him on it. Most of the townspeople knew Thomas came into Bozeman for supplies regularly, though he had always come alone. But in a small town, people tended to fill in gaps with assumptions, and if a couple appeared married, folks would generally remember seeing them together beforehand whether they actually had or not. One of the other lawmen, an older man with a marshal's badge, spoke up. Mind if we speak to your wife, Mr. Grant? Just to clear things up. I do mind, actually, Thomas said, his voice hardening. You are on my property making accusations about my wife based on nothing but a coincidence of names. Unless you have an actual warrant for her arrest, I suggest you leave. We have the authority to question anyone we suspect of being a fugitive, Hewitt said, his hand dropping to his gun belt. And I have the right to protect my wife from harassment, Thomas shot back. He did not move toward his own weapon, but his stance made clear he was prepared to. You want to question her? Get a warrant. Bring a judge. Do it properly. But you are not coming into my home and frightening my wife based on hunches. The marshal held up a hand, forestalling whatever Hewitt was about to say. Easy now. No need for things to get heated. Mr. Grant, we are just doing our jobs. The wanted woman fled Santa Fe over a year ago. The description matches. Auburn hair, green eyes, Irish accent, mid-20s. You can understand why we need to at least verify that your wife is not the same person. Thomas forced himself to take a breath to appear reasonable. Fine. Wait here. I will ask her if she is willing to speak with you, but if she says no, you leave. Understood? He did not wait for an answer before turning and striding to the house. Beatrice was waiting just inside the door, and he could see she had been listening. Her hair was twisted into a different style than she usually wore, pinned up with small braids woven through it, making her look slightly different. She had changed into a nicer dress too, one of the 2 good dresses she owned, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. Are you ready for this? Thomas asked quietly. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Yes, let us get it over with. They walked out together, Thomas's hand at the small of her back in a possessive gesture that was not entirely for show. Beatrice looked at the 4 lawmen with polite confusion. Good morning, gentlemen, she said, and Thomas noted that her Irish accent, which was usually quite subtle, had become almost non-existent. My husband said you wished to speak with me. The marshal stepped forward, removing his hat politely. Apologies for the intrusion, madam. I am Marshal Davis from Virginia City. We are looking for a woman named Beatrice Johnson, wanted for murder in New Mexico territory. Deputy Hewitt here believes you might be that woman. Beatrice's eyes widened convincingly. Murder? Good heavens, no. My name is Beatrice Grant now, though my maiden name was Jameson, not Johnson. I came to Montana from Denver 6 months ago, and I have been living in Bozeman since then. This was a lie and a risky one, but they had agreed it was necessary. If questioned, Thomas knew a few people in town who owed him favors and might be convinced to have vague memories of seeing a woman matching Beatrice's description around town months ago. You have family in Denver who could verify this? Marshal Davis asked. No family anywhere, I am afraid. Beatrice said quietly. I was raised in an orphanage in Chicago after my parents died. I worked as a seamstress in Denver for several years before deciding to try my luck in Montana. I have been working at the boarding house in Bozeman until... She glanced at Thomas with a shy smile that made his heart skip despite the circumstances. Until Thomas and I decided to marry. And you can prove you were in Denver a year ago, Hewitt pressed. I hardly carry documentation of my every movement, Beatrice said, a hint of irritation entering her voice now. But I am certain the boarding house where I lived in Denver could confirm I was there. The owner was a woman named Mrs. Catherine Hart. She runs a respectable establishment on Larimer Street. Thomas had no idea if Beatrice was making this up entirely or if there really was such a place, but she spoke with such confidence that even he almost believed her. Marshal Davis was nodding slowly, looking less certain now. "Mrs. Grant, would you mind if I looked at your hands?" the marshal asked. Beatrice extended her hands without hesitation. The marshal examined them briefly, then nodded. "You have done hard work, but these are not the hands of someone who has been running and hiding for a year. They are the hands of a woman who has been in one place, doing regular labor." "She was a housemaid before, according to the report," Hewitt objected. "Her hands would look just like this." "Actually," Beatrice said coolly, "I was a seamstress, as I just mentioned. And before you ask, yes, I can demonstrate if you would like. I am quite skilled with embroidery and dressmaking." The marshal waved this off. "That will not be necessary, madam." He turned to Hewitt. "Deputy, I do not believe this is the woman we are looking for. The description is similar, but there are enough differences, and she has a verifiable history here in Montana. Without the poster you claim to have seen, we have no grounds to arrest her." "She could be lying about all of it," Hewitt insisted, but he was starting to sound desperate rather than authoritative. "And you could be wrong," Marshal Davis said firmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Grant, I apologize for the disturbance. We will be on our way." He fixed Hewitt with a stern look. "Deputy, I expect you to drop this matter unless you can provide actual evidence." The four lawmen mounted their horses and rode out, but Thomas noticed Hewitt looking back over his shoulder, his expression dark with suspicion. When they were out of sight, Beatrice sagged against Thomas and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her steady. "You were incredible," he murmured into her hair. "I almost believed you myself." "I was terrified," she confessed, her voice muffled against his shirt. "There really is a boarding house run by Mrs. Hart in Denver. I stayed there for 3 days when I was passing through. I hoped that if they checked, she might remember me, though I doubt she would recall exactly when I was there. It does not matter. They are leaving you alone, and that is what counts." Thomas pulled back enough to look down at her. "But Hewitt is not convinced. We need to be careful." Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas and Beatrice worked to cement their story. They made a point of going into Bozeman together several times, introducing Beatrice as his new wife to anyone they met. The townspeople, starved for any kind of interesting news, were delighted by the romance of the rancher who had suddenly married his sweetheart. Thomas did not correct anyone who assumed they had been courting for months. He simply let people believe what they wanted to believe. Beatrice proved remarkably good at playing the role of devoted newlywed. She smiled at Thomas with apparent adoration, touched his arm frequently in public, laughed at his attempts at humor. What made it both easier and harder was that none of it felt like acting to Thomas. Every smile from her sent warmth through his chest. Every casual touch made him want to pull her closer and never let go. At night, they still retired to separate bedrooms, though Thomas found himself lying awake more and more often, thinking about the woman sleeping just down the hall. The woman who was his wife in name and law, but not yet in reality. He wanted to court her properly, to give her time to feel safe and cherished before they took any further steps in their relationship. But the wanting was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. He was not the only one struggling, he realized one evening about 3 weeks after their hasty wedding. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a routine they had fallen into, and Beatrice suddenly spoke into the comfortable silence. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied, looking over at her. She was worrying her lower lip, a sign he had learned meant she was nervous. "This marriage, we agreed it would be real if we both wanted it to be. Do you still feel that way?" His heart began to pound. "Yes. Do you?" Instead of answering directly, Beatrice stood and crossed to where he sat, then settled herself onto his lap, her arms sliding around his neck. "I feel like we have been dancing around each other for weeks now," she said softly, her face inches from his. "Being married but not married. Living together but separately. And I am tired of it, Thomas. I am tired of sleeping alone when my husband is just down the hall. I am tired of pretending in public that I love you when the truth is I am not pretending at all." Thomas's breath caught. "Beatrice, I love you," she said firmly, her green eyes locked on his. "I am completely, entirely in love with you. And I know we married under duress and unusual circumstances, but that does not change how I feel. You have given me safety and protection and kindness, but more than that, you have given me hope. Hope for a real future, a real life. And I want that life to include you in every way if you want the same." In answer, Thomas kissed her deeply, pouring months of longing into it. Beatrice responded with equal fervor, her fingers threading through his hair, her body pressed close against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I want the same," he said roughly. "God, Beatrice, I have wanted you for so long. But I did not want to push, did not want you to feel obligated because of what I did for you." "You did not do it to obligate me," she said. "You did it because you are a good man with a good heart, and I choose you, Thomas Grant, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you are everything I never thought I would find." He stood, lifting her with him, and she wrapped her legs around his waist with a breathless laugh. "Then let me take my wife to bed," he murmured against her lips. "Properly this time." "Yes," Beatrice breathed. "Please, yes." Thomas carried her inside, through the house to the main bedroom they had been carefully staging for appearances but never actually using. Tonight that changed. He laid her carefully on the bed, taking his time with the buttons of her dress, mapping every inch of her skin as it was revealed. Beatrice was equally thorough with him, her hands trembling slightly as she unbuttoned his shirt, traced the muscles of his chest and back. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that went beyond the physical. This was not just desire being satisfied, though there was certainly plenty of that. This was two people who had found each other against impossible odds, claiming the happiness they both deserved. Thomas was careful with her, knowing her past trauma, letting her set the pace. But Beatrice surprised him with her passion, her complete trust and openness, the way she gave herself to him without reservation. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Beatrice's head pillowed on Thomas's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "No more separate bedrooms," Thomas said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "No more dancing around each other," Beatrice agreed sleepily. "We should probably actually have a wedding celebration at some point," Thomas mused. "Something public. Really cement the idea that we are a normal married couple." Beatrice propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "Do you think Hewitt is still watching us? I think he is suspicious, but cannot prove anything. As long as we maintain the appearance of being exactly what we claim to be, there is nothing he can do." Thomas tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But yes, I think we should be careful for a while longer. Not hide, but be visible and normal. Let people see us as just another ranching couple building a life together." "We are building a life together, though," Beatrice said softly. "That part is not pretend." "No," Thomas agreed, pulling her down for another kiss. "That part is very real." The summer passed into autumn, and Thomas's suspicions about Hewitt proved correct. The deputy appeared in Bozeman periodically, always watching, always suspicious. But with no evidence and no support from the other lawmen, there was nothing he could do but watch. Thomas and Beatrice went about their lives, working the ranch, attending church on Sundays, gradually becoming just another part of the community. In September, they held a small celebration at the ranch, inviting their neighbors and friends from town for a belated wedding party. Beatrice wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale yellow with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, and Thomas thought she had never looked more beautiful. They danced in the barn that Thomas and several neighbors had cleared out and decorated, and he held her close while someone played fiddle, and another neighbor joined in on harmonica. "Happy," he murmured into her ear as they swayed together. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, beaming up at him. Deputy Hewitt showed up uninvited halfway through the evening, lurking at the edges of the gathering. Thomas felt Beatrice tense when she spotted him, but he simply held her closer and kept dancing. "Ignore him," Thomas said quietly. "He has nothing. He is just trying to make you nervous." Reverend Peters approached them when the dance ended, smiling broadly. "I must say, Thomas, I had my doubts when you showed up at my door in the middle of the night demanding to be married. But seeing you two together now, I understand. Sometimes you simply know when you have found the right person." "Yes," Thomas agreed, looking at Beatrice with open affection. "Sometimes you do." The Reverend wandered off to try the punch, and Beatrice squeezed Thomas's hand. "Do you think he really believes we had been courting before that night?" "I think he believes we belong together, which is all that matters," Thomas replied. "The details of how we got here are less important than where we are now." By the time the party ended and the last guests had departed, Hewitt had disappeared as well. Thomas locked up the barn and walked back to the house with Beatrice, his arm around her shoulders, her body warm against his side. "He is never going to stop suspecting me, is he?" Beatrice asked as they prepared for bed. "Probably not," Thomas admitted. "But suspicion is not the same as proof. And every day that passes, every person who sees us together and accepts us as a married couple makes his suspicions less relevant. Eventually, even if he still believes you are the woman from that wanted poster, no one else will. You will simply be Mrs. Beatrice Grant, respected rancher's wife, member of the community. The past will fade until it does not matter anymore." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, then turned to face him. "Do you think I will ever stop looking over my shoulder, ever stop flinching when someone knocks on the door unexpectedly?" Thomas pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "I think it will take time. But yes, eventually. You are safe here, Beatrice. I will make sure of it." Winter came to Montana with its usual fierce determination, blanketing the ranch in snow and making travel difficult. Thomas and Beatrice settled into a comfortable domestic routine, working together to care for the cattle and maintain the property. On the coldest nights, they sat by the fire in the main room, Beatrice sewing or reading aloud while Thomas worked on tack repair or went over the accounts. It was a quiet life, peaceful in a way Thomas had never quite achieved when he lived alone. Beatrice filled the house with warmth and laughter, humming while she worked, chatting with him over meals, making love with him with increasing confidence and passion. Thomas fell more deeply in love with her with each passing day, marveling at how she had transformed not just his home but his entire existence. In late January, Beatrice came to him with news that made his heart soar. "Thomas, I think I am with child." He stared at her for a moment, the words not quite registering, then swept her up in his arms and spun her around, making her laugh and cling to him. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be," she said, her eyes bright with joy and a touch of nervousness. "I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling ill in the mornings. I think by summer we will have a baby." Thomas set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile, then dropped to his knees and pressed a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he murmured. "I cannot wait to meet you." Beatrice laughed, tears streaming down her face, her hands coming to rest in his hair. "You are going to be such a wonderful father." "And you will be an amazing mother," Thomas said, standing and cupping her face in his hands. "Our child is so lucky to have you." The joy of the pregnancy was slightly dampened by practical concerns. Beatrice would need to see a doctor eventually, which meant more scrutiny, more chances for someone to question who she really was. But when Thomas raised these concerns, Beatrice shook her head firmly. "I am Beatrice Grant. That is who I am now, legally and in every way that matters. The woman I was before, the woman who fled Santa Fe, she does not exist anymore. I will not let fear keep me from properly caring for our child." She was right, Thomas knew. They could not live in constant paranoia. So in March, when the worst of the winter had passed, they made the journey to Virginia City, where there was a proper doctor. Dr. Whitman was an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands, and he examined Beatrice with professional thoroughness. "You are healthy and strong, Mrs. Grant," he pronounced after the examination. "I expect you will have a relatively easy pregnancy and delivery, assuming you continue to take care of yourself. The baby should arrive sometime in late July or early August, based on what you have told me." Thomas felt relief wash over him, and he gripped Beatrice's hand tightly. On the ride home, she was quiet, and he finally asked what she was thinking about. "I was just imagining it," she said softly. "Holding our baby for the first time, teaching our child to walk and talk, watching you play with them, teach them to ride. All the things I never let myself dream about because I did not think I would ever have a real life." She looked over at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You gave me this, Thomas. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Thomas corrected. "I was just existing before you came into my life, Beatrice. You made me start living again." Spring brought new life to the ranch as it always did, but this year it felt especially significant. Beatrice's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her belly gradually swelling with their growing child. Thomas found himself constantly amazed by the changes in her body, by the fact that they had created a new life together. He had always wanted children, but after years alone, he had resigned himself to remaining a bachelor. Now he was going to be a father, and the thought filled him with equal parts joy and terror. "What if I am not good at it?" he asked Beatrice one evening as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the rounded curve of her stomach. "At what?" she asked, running her fingers through his hair. "Being a father. What if I do not know what to do?" Beatrice laughed softly. "Do you think I know what to do as a mother? Neither of us has any idea what we are doing, Thomas. We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." He felt the baby kick against his palm and marveled at it. "Did you feel that?" "I feel every kick," Beatrice said with amusement. "This child is going to be strong, just like their father." In early June, Deputy Hewitt made one final attempt to prove his suspicions. He appeared at the ranch unannounced, accompanied by a well-dressed man Thomas did not recognize. "Mr. Grant," Hewitt said with barely concealed satisfaction. "This is Richard Sutton from Santa Fe. He has traveled a long way to see if your wife is the woman who murdered his son." Thomas felt ice form in his veins, but he kept his expression neutral. Beatrice appeared in the doorway of the house, very obviously pregnant now, and he saw her face go pale as she recognized the name. Richard Sutton was a man in his late 50s, silver-haired and expensively dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. His eyes locked onto Beatrice, and Thomas saw recognition flash across his features. But then Sutton's gaze dropped to Beatrice's swollen belly, and something shifted in his expression. "Mrs. Grant," Sutton said, his voice carefully controlled. "Deputy Hewitt tells me you may be the woman I have been searching for, a housemaid who killed my son and fled." Beatrice lifted her chin, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I am sorry for your loss, Mr. Sutton, but I am not that woman. I have been living in Montana for over a year now, and I have been married to Thomas for nearly a year. As you can see, I am expecting our first child." Sutton stared at her for a long moment, and Thomas tensed, ready to step between them if necessary. But then, to his surprise, Sutton's shoulders sagged slightly. "I see that," Sutton said quietly. He looked at Thomas. "Your wife, is she good to you? Does she make you happy?" Thomas frowned at the strange question but answered honestly. "She is the best thing that ever happened to me." Sutton nodded slowly, then turned to Hewitt. "This is not the woman, I can see that clearly now." "But sir, the resemblance," Hewitt protested. "Is superficial at best," Sutton interrupted firmly. "The woman who worked for me was young, unmarried, and childless. This woman is clearly settled and respectable, with a husband and a child on the way. I have wasted enough time and money on this wild goose chase, Deputy. I am returning to Santa Fe." Hewitt looked between them, his face reddening with frustration. "You traveled all this way and you are not even going to question her properly?" "I have seen what I needed to see," Sutton said. He tipped his hat to Beatrice. "Congratulations on your coming child, Mrs. Grant. I hope you have an easy delivery." He mounted his horse and rode away without another word, leaving Hewitt sputtering in the yard. The deputy glared at Thomas and Beatrice for a moment, then spat in the dust at his feet. "I know what you did," he said venomously. "I know she is the one from that poster, but if Sutton will not pursue it, I cannot do anything. You got away with it, Grant, but I hope you can live with yourself protecting a murderer." "I can live with myself just fine," Thomas said coldly. "Now get off my property." After Hewitt rode away, Thomas turned to find Beatrice trembling violently, tears streaming down her face. He gathered her into his arms carefully, mindful of her belly between them. "Why did he do that?" she sobbed into his shoulder. "Richard Sutton knows it was me." I could see it in his eyes. "Why did he lie?" Thomas held her close, his own heart racing as he processed what had just happened. "I do not know. Maybe seeing you pregnant changed something for him. Maybe he realized that destroying your life would not bring his son back." "His son tried to rape me," Beatrice choked out. "He tried to force himself on me, and I defended myself. How could his father just walk away?" "Maybe he knows that," Thomas said gently. "Maybe deep down he knows what kind of man his son really was. Or maybe he just saw a chance to end the cycle of violence and took it. Either way, it is over now, Beatrice. Do you understand? It is truly over. Even Hewitt cannot pursue this anymore without Sutton's support." She pulled back to look up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "Is it really over?" "It is really over," Thomas confirmed, wiping her tears away with his thumbs. "You are safe. Our baby is safe. We can finally stop looking over our shoulders." The relief that washed over her face was profound, and she sagged against him, exhausted by the emotional turmoil. Thomas guided her inside and settled her on the sofa, then made her tea and sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "I need to tell you something," Beatrice said after a while, her voice steadier now. "Something I should have said months ago." "What is it?" "When I first came to work for you, I was planning to stay just long enough to earn some money and move on. I had been running for so long, never staying anywhere more than a few months. I did not think I could afford to put down roots anywhere." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "But then I started getting to know you. You were kind to me, respectful. You treated me like a person, not just a servant. And slowly, I started to hope that maybe I could have a real life again, that maybe I had found a place where I belonged." "You do belong here," Thomas said. "This is your home for as long as you want it to be." "Forever then," Beatrice said. "I want this to be my home forever. I want to raise our children here, grow old with you here. I want to become part of this community, part of this life. No more running, no more hiding. Just being Beatrice Grant, your wife, mother of your children." "That sounds perfect to me," Thomas said, pulling her closer and kissing her forehead. "That sounds absolutely perfect." Their son was born on a sweltering day in early August, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Thomas paced the house anxiously while the doctor and a midwife from town attended to Beatrice, trying not to lose his mind at every sound from the bedroom. When he finally heard the cry of a newborn baby, he nearly collapsed with relief. Dr. Whitman emerged a few minutes later, tired but smiling. "You have a healthy baby boy, Mr. Grant, and your wife did beautifully. She is asking for you." Thomas rushed into the bedroom to find Beatrice propped up against pillows, exhausted and sweaty but radiant with joy, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he entered, her smile so brilliant it took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Thomas approached the bed carefully, as if he might break the fragile scene before him, then sat on the edge and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his eyes were closed, his tiny fist pressed against his cheek. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers curled reflexively around his, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a fierce protectiveness and love unlike anything he had ever experienced. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking James, after my father," Beatrice said. "James Grant." "What do you think, James Grant?" Thomas repeated, testing the sound of it. "I think it is perfect. Hello, James, welcome to the family." The baby stirred at the sound of his voice, making a small mewling sound, and Beatrice laughed softly. "I think he knows his father's voice already." Thomas looked at Beatrice, at the woman who had come into his life as a desperate fugitive and become his whole world. "I love you," he said, the words feeling inadequate for the depth of what he felt. "I love you so much, Beatrice. Thank you for this, for our son, for our life together, for choosing me." "I love you too," Beatrice said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And I would choose you again, every single time." They sat together like that for a long time, the three of them, a family now in every sense of the word. Thomas thought about the path that had brought them here, the fear and danger and desperate chances taken. He thought about the wanted poster he had burned in the stove, the marriage certificate signed in the middle of the night, the lies they had told and the truth they had built on top of those lies. None of it felt wrong. It felt like destiny, like this was exactly where they were both always meant to end up over the next few years. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. James grew from a tiny infant into a boisterous toddler with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubbornness. Beatrice bloomed in motherhood, patient and loving and firm when necessary. Thomas watched his wife and son together and felt grateful every single day for the life they had built. In the spring of 1885, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less shocking but no less joyful. Their daughter was born in November, a tiny thing with auburn hair and lungs that could wake the entire house when she wanted feeding. They named her Sarah, and James was initially skeptical of this new addition but quickly became a devoted big brother. The ranch prospered as well. Thomas's cattle business grew steadily, and he was able to hire a few ranch hands to help with the work, giving him more time to spend with his family. Beatrice maintained a large garden, preserved food for the winter, and became known in Bozeman for her beautiful needlework. She made friends with the other ranch wives, attended quilting circles and church socials, became a respected member of the community. Deputy Marshal Hewitt eventually gave up his crusade and moved on to other jurisdictions. They heard through the grapevine that he had been reprimanded by his superiors for wasting time and resources on unfounded suspicions. Richard Sutton never returned to Montana, and as far as Thomas knew, the wanted poster from Santa Fe had never been reissued. Beatrice stopped flinching at unexpected visitors. She stopped looking over her shoulder when they went to town. Slowly, the fear that had defined so much of her life faded away, replaced by confidence and contentment. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thomas and Beatrice arranged for the children to stay with a neighbor and spent the evening alone together, something that had become increasingly rare with 2 young ones underfoot. They rode out to a favorite spot on the ranch, a meadow overlooking a small creek, and spread a blanket to watch the sunset. "You ever think about that night?" Beatrice asked, leaning back against Thomas's chest, his arms wrapped around her. "The night you burned the wanted poster." "Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "Do you?" "All the time," she said. "I think about how different my life would be right now if you had not made that choice. If you had turned me in or even just asked me to leave, I would probably still be running, still alone, still terrified. Or more likely, I would be dead, hanged for a crime that was really self-defense." "I could not do it," Thomas said. "The moment I saw that poster, before I even knew the full story, something in me just rebelled against the idea of letting them take you. I knew you, Beatrice. I knew your gentle heart, your kindness. I could not reconcile that with the picture they had painted of you as a murderer." "You saved my life," Beatrice said, turning to look up at him. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety, yes, but you also gave me love and hope and a future. You gave me our children, this life, everything I have now." "You saved me too," Thomas said. "I was so lonely before you came, even if I did not want to admit it. I had convinced myself that being alone was easier, safer, but you showed me what I was missing. You filled my house with life and laughter and love. We saved each other, Beatrice." She kissed him then, soft and lingering, and Thomas held her close as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 5 years, he thought. 5 years since that desperate night when they had ridden to town and gotten married by candlelight. It felt like a lifetime ago and like yesterday all at once. "You have any regrets?" Beatrice asked when they finally broke apart. Thomas thought about it seriously, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Everything we did, every choice we made, it brought us here. How could I regret any of it when I look at what we have? Even marrying a woman you barely knew based on a lie." There was a teasing note in her voice, but also genuine curiosity. "We did not know each other well then," Thomas agreed. "But I knew enough. I knew you were strong and brave and good. I knew I was falling in love with you, even if I had not fully admitted it to myself yet. And the rest, we learned together. That is what marriage is it not? Learning each other, growing together." "You are a romantic, Thomas Grant," Beatrice said, smiling. "Only with you," he replied. "Only ever with you." They stayed out until the stars emerged, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the rare solitude. When they finally rode back to collect the children and return home, Thomas felt deeply content. This was his life now, this beautiful, imperfect, precious life he had built with the woman he loved. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. James learned to ride almost as soon as he could walk, following his father around the ranch with dogged determination. Sarah was quieter, more contemplative, but with a core of steel that reminded Thomas of her mother. In 1888, Beatrice gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and David, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. The house was never quiet anymore, always filled with children's laughter and arguments, with the sounds of family life. Thomas loved every noisy, exhausting, wonderful moment of it. He watched Beatrice manage their expanding household with grace and humor, and he fell more in love with her with each passing year. By 1890, the Wild West was becoming less wild. Montana had achieved statehood the previous year, bringing with it more law and order, more civilization. Bozeman was growing rapidly, with new businesses opening regularly, a proper school being built, even talk of bringing in a railroad spur. The days of outlaws and frontier justice were fading into memory. One evening in the fall of that year, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Beatrice came to Thomas in his office where he was working on the accounts. She sat on the edge of his desk, and he looked up with a smile. "Finished for the night?" he asked. "I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, and there was a seriousness in her tone that made him set down his pen and give her his full attention. "What is it?" "I have been thinking," Beatrice began, "about who I was and who I am now. Beatrice Johnson died 8 years ago in a way. She disappeared and Beatrice Grant took her place, and I am grateful for that, Thomas. I love being your wife, being a mother, being part of this community, but sometimes I wonder if there is more I should do." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, confused. "There are other women like me," Beatrice said quietly. "Women who have fled violence, who are running from situations that were not their fault, who have no resources and no hope. I was fortunate enough to find safety and love, but most do not. I keep thinking about what I could do to help them." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. "What did you have in mind?" "I am not sure yet," she admitted. "Maybe a place where women could come for help, for shelter. Or maybe just making it known that our door is open if someone needs it. I have this life, this safety because of you. I want to give some of that back, help someone else the way you helped me." Pride swelled in Thomas's chest. Of course Beatrice would think of others, even after everything she had been through. It was part of who she was, that fundamental goodness and compassion. "I think that is a wonderful idea," he said. "And I will support you however I can. This is your home, Beatrice. If you want to open it to others who need help, then that is exactly what we will do." She slid off the desk and into his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Have I told you lately that you are the best man I have ever known?" "You might have mentioned it once or twice," Thomas said with a grin, pulling her closer, "but I never get tired of hearing it." Word spread quietly through certain circles that the Grant Ranch was a safe place for women in trouble. Over the next few years, Beatrice helped dozens of women, offering them temporary shelter, helping them find legitimate work, sometimes just providing a sympathetic ear and practical advice. Thomas supported her fully, even when it meant strangers in his home, even when some of the women's situations brought danger close to his family. "These women need help," Beatrice said simply, whenever Thomas expressed concern. "How can I turn them away when I know exactly what they are going through?" So the Grant house became known as a place of refuge, and Beatrice became known as a woman who could be trusted. She never told anyone her own story, but Thomas suspected that some of the women guessed. There was recognition in their eyes sometimes, the understanding that only comes from shared experience. In 1895, when James was 13 and already helping seriously with the ranch work, he asked his father about some of the women who came through their home. Why do they come here specifically? He wanted to know. Why our ranch and not somewhere else? Thomas considered how to answer, then decided on a version of the truth. Your mother understands what it is like to be alone and afraid. She knows how important it is to have someone who will help without judgment. So she offers that to others. Was Mother alone and afraid once? James asked, his young face serious. Once, yes, Thomas said. Before she came here, before we were married, but she found safety and a new life, and now she wants to help others do the same. James thought about this, then nodded. I think that is good. I think Mother is very brave. She is the bravest person I know, Thomas agreed. The 20th century arrived with celebrations and hope for the future. The Grant children were growing up. James was nearly 18, already taller than his father and increasingly capable of running the ranch. Sarah at 15 was quiet and bookish, talking about becoming a teacher. The twins were 12, full of mischief and energy. And there were 2 more children now as well. A girl born in 1893 and a boy in 1896, rounding out the family at 6 children total. 6, Beatrice said one evening, laughing as she surveyed the dinner table crowded with their large family. When did we end up with 6 children? When you kept being so beautiful, I could not keep my hands off you. Thomas said quietly enough that only she could hear, making her blush, and swatted him playfully. They were in their 40s now, both of them, with streaks of gray in their hair and lines around their eyes earned through years of laughter and hard work and raising children. But Thomas thought Beatrice was more beautiful than ever, her face softened by contentment, her eyes bright with the joy of the life they had built. In 1900, 18 years after that desperate night when he had burned a wanted poster and locked his door against the law, Thomas and Beatrice went on a trip. They left the older children in charge of the younger ones and the ranch, and took the train to Denver, something they had never done before. It was meant to be a celebration of their 18th wedding anniversary, a chance to spend time alone together without the constant demands of children and ranch work. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, walked through the city looking at shops and sights. On their last evening, they found themselves at a park overlooking the city as the sun set, sitting on a bench and watching the world go by. This is nice, Beatrice said, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder. But I miss home already. I miss the children, I miss our bed, I even miss the sound of the cattle. Thomas laughed. We have been gone 3 days. I know, Beatrice said, but home is where my heart is, our ranch, our family, that is where I want to be. Then we will go home tomorrow, Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. Though I am glad we did this. It is good to remember we are not just parents and ranchers. We are still us, still Thomas and Beatrice. I never forget that, Beatrice said softly. Every time I look at you, I remember the man who chose to protect me when he had every reason not to. The man who married me to keep me safe and then loved me so completely, I never doubted I made the right choice. I remember falling in love with you, Thomas. I remember every moment of building this life with you, and I am grateful for all of it. Thomas pulled her closer, his throat tight with emotion. I love you, Beatrice Grant. I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, she replied. Forever and always. They returned to the ranch the next day to find everything running smoothly, though the children were clearly happy to have them home. Life resumed its normal pace, the rhythm of seasons and years that defined ranch life. James married at 21 to a sweet girl from town, and they built a house on the far edge of the Grant property, planning to eventually take over the ranch. Sarah went to teacher's college and came home to teach at the Bozeman School. The twins headed west to try their hand at logging in Oregon. The two youngest were still at home, growing and learning. And through it all, Thomas and Beatrice remained the center, the foundation on which the family was built. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings when weather permitted, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still reached for each other in the night with the comfort of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded. On a crisp autumn morning in 1907, Thomas woke to find Beatrice already awake beside him, propped up on her elbow and watching him with a soft smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," she replied. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am," Beatrice said. "I am 50 years old, Thomas, 50. And I have lived more than half my life as your wife, as part of this family we made together. Sometimes I can barely remember the woman I was before, the frightened girl running from her past. That feels like another lifetime." "It was another lifetime," Thomas said, reaching up to touch her face. "You are different now, stronger, happier." "Because of you," Beatrice said. "You gave me the chance to become this person, to have this life." "We did it together," Thomas corrected, as he always did. "Every step of the way we did it together." She bent to kiss him, slow and sweet and full of love. 25 years next month," she murmured against his lips. "We should have a party." "Do we have to?" Thomas groaned playfully. "Can we not just have a quiet dinner, just the two of us?" "Our children would never forgive us," Beatrice said, laughing. "Besides, I want to celebrate. I want everyone to know how happy we are, how blessed I have been to spend a quarter-century as your wife." So they had a party, a grand affair with dozens of guests filling the house and spilling out onto the lawn. Their children and grandchildren, neighbors and friends from town, even a few of the women Beatrice had helped over the years, came to celebrate with them. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, toasts and stories. At one point in the evening, Thomas found himself standing apart from the crowd, watching Beatrice move through the guests with grace and warmth. She was 50 years old, her auburn hair now streaked heavily with gray, her face lined with age. But to him, she was just as beautiful as the young woman who had hummed in his kitchen so many years ago, unaware that her world was about to change forever. She looked over and caught him staring, and her face lit up with a smile that was for him alone. She excused herself from her conversation and made her way through the crowd to his side. "Hiding," she teased. "Observing," he corrected. "And thinking about how grateful I am for every single day I have spent with you." "Only every single day?" Beatrice asked, her eyes twinkling. "Not every single moment." "Every single moment," Thomas agreed, pulling her into his arms for a dance even though there was no music playing where they stood. "Every breath, every heartbeat. You are my whole world, Beatrice." "And you are mine," she said, resting her head against his chest. "My love, my partner, my home. Everything I am, everything I have, it is all because you chose to burn that poster instead of turning me in." "Best decision I ever made," Thomas said firmly. "Well, that and actually marrying you." They swayed together for a moment, lost in their own world despite the party happening around them. Then Sarah called out that it was time to cut the cake, and they rejoined the celebration, hand in hand as they always were. The years continued to unfold, bringing changes and challenges as years always do. The ranch passed to James and his growing family, though Thomas and Beatrice remained on the property in the main house, helping where they could but gradually stepping back from the hard physical labor. Thomas's hair went completely white, and his joints grew stiff on cold mornings. Beatrice moved more slowly too, and sometimes forgot things, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit undimmed. They had 12 grandchildren by 1915, with more likely on the way, and they delighted in spoiling each one. The younger grandchildren knew Thomas and Beatrice simply as the kind old couple in the big house who always had cookies and stories. The older ones were more curious about their grandparents' history. "How did you and Grandpa meet?" one of them asked Beatrice one afternoon when several of the older grandchildren had gathered for Sunday dinner. Beatrice glanced at Thomas across the table, and they shared a look full of memory and meaning. "Your grandfather gave me a job when I needed one," she said truthfully. "And then he gave me much more than that. He gave you his heart," one of the granddaughters said romantically. "He did," Beatrice agreed, smiling at Thomas. "And I gave him mine, and we built this whole beautiful life together." "Did you know right away that he was the one?" another grandchild asked. Beatrice thought back to that hot July day in 1882 when Thomas had walked into the kitchen with a wanted poster in his hand and everything had hung in the balance. "I knew he was someone special," she said carefully. "Someone worth trusting, worth believing in." The love part came later, but the trust was immediate. "What is the secret?" asked James's wife, who had been married 10 years and sometimes struggled with the demands of running a household and raising children. "How have you two stayed so happy for so long?" Thomas reached across the table and took Beatrice's hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "We chose each other," he said simply. "Every day, through everything, we kept choosing each other. That is the secret. That is all." The young woman asked, sounding skeptical. "That is everything," Beatrice said. "Choice and commitment and love. Those 3 things will carry you through anything." In the winter of 1918, as the world reeled from the Great War and the influenza pandemic that followed, Thomas fell ill. It was not the flu, but rather his heart, which had been giving him trouble for the past year. The doctor from town came and examined him, then pulled Beatrice aside with a grave expression. "His heart is weak, Mrs. Grant. It could be weeks or months. There is no way to know for certain. But I suggest you make preparations." Beatrice nodded numbly, then went back to Thomas's bedside. He looked so small suddenly, this man who had always seemed larger than life to her. He opened his eyes when she sat down and took his hand. "What did the doctor say?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "He said we should make the most of whatever time we have," Beatrice said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Thomas squeezed her hand weakly. "We have always done that, made the most of every moment." "Do not leave me," Beatrice whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, Thomas, I cannot do this without you." "You are the strongest person I know," Thomas said. "You survived things that would have broken most people. You built a whole new life from nothing." "You can survive anything, Beatrice, even losing me." "I do not want to," she said, sobbing now. "I do not want to survive without you. You are my whole heart." "And you are mine," Thomas said, pulling her hand to his lips and kissing it gently, "which means part of me will always be with you. In our children, in our grandchildren, in the life we built together. I am not really leaving, Beatrice. I will just be watching from somewhere else." She climbed carefully into the bed beside him, and he wrapped his arms around her as best he could, holding her close the way he had done for 36 years. They stayed like that for hours, talking quietly about their life together, remembering the good times, the hard times, everything that had made them who they were. "I never thanked you properly," Thomas said at one point, "for trusting me that night, for letting me help you, for taking a chance on marriage with a stranger. You could have run, but you stayed. You gave me the most incredible life, Beatrice. I want you to know that." "You saved me," Beatrice said, "in every way possible, And then you loved me so well, so completely, that I forgot I had ever been broken. I would not trade a single moment of our time together, Thomas Grant. Not one. No regrets, he asked, echoing the question from so many years ago. Not a single one, she confirmed. Only gratitude for every day I got to spend as your wife. Thomas lived for another 3 weeks, long enough to see all of their children one final time, long enough to hold his youngest grandchild, long enough to make peace with the life he had lived and the legacy he was leaving. Beatrice never left his side, sleeping in the chair next to his bed, feeding him when he could eat, reading to him, talking to him, just being present. On a quiet morning in early February, with snow falling softly outside and Beatrice holding his hand, Thomas Grant took his last breath. His final words were, "Love you, my Beatrice, always." The funeral was attended by seemingly the entire town of Bozeman and dozens more from the surrounding area. People spoke of Thomas as a fair employer, a good neighbor, a devoted husband and father. But for Beatrice, the words felt inadequate. How could anyone truly capture what Thomas had meant, who he had been, what they had shared? She stood at his graveside and thought about the moment that had changed both their lives. The wanted poster, the quick decision, the desperate ride to town. The marriage that had started as protection and become the truest partnership she could have imagined. The love that had grown and deepened with every passing year. "Thank you," she whispered to the cold ground where they had laid him, "for everything, for all of it. I will love you until my last breath, and then beyond." Beatrice lived another 7 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, remaining active in the community, continuing to help women who needed assistance. But part of her was missing, had been missing since that February morning when Thomas died. She did not say this to anyone, did not complain, but those who knew her best could see it in her eyes. On their would have been 44th wedding anniversary, Beatrice rode out alone to the meadow overlooking the creek, the place where she and Thomas had spent their 5th anniversary. She sat on the grass and talked to him as if he were there, telling him about the grandchildren, about the ranch, about how much she missed him. "I am tired," she admitted finally. "Tired of waking up without you, tired of this world without you in it. I have lived a good life, Thomas. Because of you, I lived the best life. But I am ready to come home now, ready to see you again." She died peacefully in her sleep that night, in the bed she had shared with Thomas for so many years. Her children, grieving but understanding, buried her beside him in the Bozeman cemetery, under a headstone that read, "Beatrice Grant, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She chose love and lived without fear." Their story passed into family legend, though the full truth was never known to anyone but them. The children and grandchildren knew that Thomas and Beatrice had loved each other deeply, had built something rare and precious together. They knew their grandmother had come from difficult circumstances, and their grandfather had given her a new life. But the wanted poster, the desperate flight from justice, the marriage of convenience that became something extraordinary, those details remained a secret carried to the grave. The Grant Ranch continued to thrive under James's leadership, and eventually his sons after him. The house that Thomas had built and Beatrice had made a home remained standing for generations, and people always said it had a warm, welcoming feeling, as if the love of the original occupants had soaked into the very walls. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, people swore they could hear laughter drifting across the meadow, or see 2 figures walking hand in hand along the creek. Just the ghosts of memory, perhaps, or wishful thinking. Or maybe, just maybe, the enduring evidence that some love stories are strong enough to transcend even death, that choosing each other against all odds can create something truly eternal. Thomas had burned the warrant and locked the door against injustice all those years ago, choosing love over law, humanity over blind obedience. And in doing so, he had not just saved one frightened woman. He had created a legacy of love and family and compassion that echoed through generations, proving that sometimes the most illegal act is the most moral one, and that true justice is found not in following rules, but in protecting the innocent and cherishing the ones we love. Their story was one of redemption and second chances, of courage and choice, of partnership and unwavering devotion. It was a reminder that people are more than their worst moments, that running from persecution is not the same as guilt, and that love, real love, means standing beside someone when the whole world stands against them. And so the tale of the cowboy who discovered his housekeeper had a price on her head, who burned the warrant and locked the door against the law to protect her, who married her in the middle of the night and loved her for the rest of his life, became part of the tapestry of the American West. A story of when two desperate souls found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of fear and loss. A love story for the ages, born in crisis and perfected through decades of choice, commitment, and an unwavering belief that they were meant to be together. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the circumstances that brought them together, not the lies they told or the laws they bent, but the life they built and the love they shared. Thomas and Beatrice Grant had found each other when both needed saving, and they had spent the rest of their lives saving each other over and over again in countless small ways. And if that was not the true spirit of the Wild West, of people forging new identities and new lives on the frontier, of choosing loyalty over convenience and love over everything else, then what was? Their story endured because it spoke to something fundamental in the human spirit, the desire to be known, to be chosen, to be loved despite our flaws and our pasts, the desire to find home not in a place but in a person, and to hold on to that person with everything we have. Thomas had held on to Beatrice from that first night until his last breath, and she had held on to him with equal fervor, grateful every day for the man who had looked at her with compassion instead of judgment, who had seen her as someone worth saving rather than someone to be condemned. Together, they had proven that love is not always convenient or simple or socially approved. Sometimes love means burning the rules and making your own path, trusting that if two people are committed enough, strong enough, and devoted enough to each other, they can overcome anything the world throws at them. The monument to their love was not just the headstones in the cemetery or the house that still stood on the ranch. It was in the family they created, the lives they touched, the example they set of what marriage could be when two people truly chose each other every single day. It was in the women Beatrice helped find safety and new starts, carrying forward the gift Thomas had given her. It was in the values they instilled in their children and grandchildren: compassion, courage, loyalty, and the understanding that family is built not just through blood but through choice and commitment. Every anniversary celebrated by their descendants, every grandchild who heard stories of the devoted couple who had loved each other so completely, every act of kindness extended to someone in need, all of it traced back to that moment in July of 1882, when Thomas Grant made a choice. When he looked at a wanted poster, looked at the gentle woman in his kitchen, and decided that his conscience mattered more than the law, that protecting the innocent was more important than collecting a reward, that love was worth any risk. He burned the warrant and locked the door, and in doing so, he opened up a future neither of them could have imagined. A future full of laughter and tears, struggles and triumphs, children and grandchildren, quiet moments and grand adventures. A future built on the foundation of that one courageous choice and strengthened every day thereafter by their commitment to each other and to the life they were building together. It was, in the end, a very simple story. A man met a woman. He chose to help her instead of harm her. They fell in love. They built a life. They faced challenges together and celebrated victories together. They grew old together, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had become part of. And when death finally parted them, it was with the knowledge that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and made every moment count. Simple, perhaps, but also extraordinary in its simplicity. Because in a world that often demanded conformity and obedience, where the law was not always just, and society was not always kind, Thomas and Beatrice had dared to write their own story. They had taken broken pieces and made something whole, had turned desperation into hope, had transformed a marriage of convenience into one of the great love stories of their time. And long after they were gone, long after even their grandchildren had grown old and passed on, the story remained. The story of how love can bloom even in the darkest circumstances, how trust can be built in a single moment of compassion, how choosing each other, truly choosing each other every single day, can create something that endures beyond death itself. That was the legacy of Thomas and Beatrice Grant. Not just the ranch or the family name or the material things they left behind, but the proof that love, real and true and courageous love, can conquer anything. Even wanted posters and marshal's warrants and a past that threatened to destroy any hope of a future. Even fear and loss and the weight of secrets. Even time itself, eventually, because stories like theirs do not really end. They simply become part of the fabric of history, inspiring others to be brave, to choose love, to believe that second chances are possible, and that every person deserves the opportunity to start over, to be seen for who they truly are rather than judged for their worst moment. Thomas saw Beatrice that way from the beginning. He looked past the accusations and the warrant and saw her heart, her essential goodness. And she, in turn, saw him, not just the successful rancher or the convenient solution to her problems, but the good man with the generous spirit and the capacity for great love. They saw each other, truly saw each other, and they chose to build a life on that foundation of mutual recognition and respect. That, perhaps more than anything else, was why their love story endured. Not because it was easy or conventional, but because it was real. Raw and honest, and built on the understanding that they had both been given something precious, a chance at the life they were meant to have together. They never took that chance for granted. They honored it every day through their choices, their commitment, their unwavering dedication to each other and to the family they created. In the annals of the Wild West, there were many tales of outlaws and heroes, of quick-draw gunfights and cattle drives, of gold strikes and land rushes. But the story of Thomas and Beatrice Grant was different. It was quieter, more personal, but no less significant. It was the story of how two ordinary people did something extraordinary. They chose love when it would have been easier to choose fear. They built trust when suspicion would have been safer. They created a future when they both had every reason to believe they had none. And in doing so, they proved that the real spirit of the frontier was not just about conquering land or striking it rich or making a name for yourself. It was about the courage to start over, the strength to stand by your principles even when the world disagreed, and the faith to believe that somewhere out there was another person who would see you, really see you, and choose you anyway. Thomas chose Beatrice. Beatrice chose Thomas. And from that mutual choice came everything else. The love, the life, the family, the legacy. It all traced back to a wanted poster burned in a kitchen stove and a door locked against injustice, to one man's decision that mercy mattered more than law, and to two people's willingness to trust each other with their whole hearts. That was their gift to the world, the lesson embedded in their story. That love is always a choice, and when you choose it bravely, honestly, with your whole heart, it can transform everything. It can turn a fugitive into a wife, a lonely rancher into a devoted husband, a desperate situation into the beginning of a beautiful life. It can create families and legacies and stories that endure for generations. And so, more than a century after Thomas Grant burned that wanted poster and changed both their lives forever, the story lived on. In the ranch that still bore their name, in the descendants who carried their blood and their values, in the memories preserved and passed down through generations. The story of how love won, how two people saved each other, and how choosing each other, every single day for 44 years until death parted them, proved to be the greatest adventure of all. A true Wild West love story, born in fire and fear but tempered by time into something unbreakable, unshakable, and utterly eternal.